So I've been trying to work on like some type of term to call it, but South Bend is in this like really weird middle. It's big enough to have all the world's problems, right? But it's small enough that you know the people who are working on that to make a difference, and you can feel like you're making a difference.
I mean, South Bend is what you make it.
Little country town.
It's kind of depressing.
This town was built on industry.
I imagine that I'll be in South Bend the rest of my life.
South Bend is surprising.
We had Studebaker employing thousands of workers, and we had Oliver Corporation, we had the Bendix Corporation, we had all these factories, and they were booming. And you didn't have to have education, you just come and be willing to work.
You know, folks have gone for the new Studebaker in such a big way this year that production has been increased higher than it's ever been before in the history of Studebaker factories.
My dad moved from down south up here to the Midwest, and I was born 3 years later, and two sisters, both older than me. And my dad really, he made the most of his opportunities here in South Bend. He took full advantage. He worked 2 or 3 jobs sometimes. So sometimes he might work at Oliver Corporation all day. He might work a part-time job in another factory and something like that, because he really appreciated the opportunity to make money. And the interesting thing about that is you could make enough money to live like a middle-class family back in the 1940s, after the Second World War, which is when he moved here. And so there was a lot of that movement going on, especially a lot of, I started to say black workers coming from the South, but it wasn't just black, but a lot of workers coming from the South who were looking for greater opportunities to make more money. And so we were part of that move.
Most of the people worked at Studebaker. That was where they worked. So that was really devastating to the city and the community. People just went through some really hard times during that. Just the whole economy changed. It happened so gradually that I couldn't say this was a dramatic point. When Studebaker left, particularly when they took all the pension money with them, there was an impact, but I was a little kid, so I was, in grade school, and so I didn't understand the impact that it had. But my parents went through hard times, other parents went through hard times, as I was just a kid. This is just the way it was.
Currently about 8 years, coming up on 8 here in be October. Was born here, raised here, left at an earlier age of 17. Was gone for several, 15 plus years, and I was raised on the South Side. Went to some Catholic schools and some public schools, and moved away because it was time to get out of here. I mean, at that point in my life, looking at South Bend, it was a real shithole. I mean, there was heightened racial divides, a nowhere dead-end street to be on, no path to any kind of prosperity. Oh, I just thought the spread of the despair and the Studebaker would just spread over the whole place, because it slowly has. Like, that's what happened. As in, once Studebaker left, which was a long time ago, but then, you know, you hear the stories from, you know, your parents, you know, Sears moved out of downtown eventually. You know, mom and pop stores moved out because they just couldn't compete anymore. No one's going down there.
It was basically the shopping area, and we did a lot of our shopping down there. Not so much grocery shopping, but more things. And we got pretty comfortable with it because we knew where to go to get when we want shirts or when we wanted this or that. And so we found it quite attractive. And then the malls came in, and as the downtown area ceased to be a shopping area, and nobody could figure out what to do with it. At one point, they decided they were going to have a pedestrian mall down there. And it was about the same time the stores were leaving, and there was a lot of disruption downtown. So I don't think that helped anybody, and that finally proved negative. And I don't think there's any shopping down there now. And it's evolved now from what used to be a downtown shopping area to really a professional area. A lot of the hospitals down there, a lot of the medical services are in that area, a lot of businesses are there, a lot of young people find apartments there. There's been a lot of apartments built in that neighborhood, in the downtown area. So it's kind of reinvented the downtown as a residential, social kind of area.
I'll say I was not a fan. I come from Chicago, so I was born and raised in Chicago, and you come here, and I want to say 23 was like one lane. I mean, it was so narrow, and it's mostly dirt, and you're going places. Lights are off by 7 p.m. everywhere, so it's dark, and like I did not understand where I was at. You just couldn't do anything in the evening.
Downtown South Bend was nothing growing up. Yeah, it was, well, you had the Studebaker factories, they're all run down buildings, everything broken windows everywhere. There was no community downtown. There was no stores downtown. You had the Army surplus store that you go down to and buy crap, you know, thrift stores. And other than that, you would have to either go to the south side had its own mall and the north side had its own mall. And so everything happened out at the malls. Nothing was ever generated downtown. So it was a ghost town. And that was just how it grew up. I mean, my whole life, that's what downtown was.
You got Notre Dame. That's pretty much it. You know what I'm saying? Like, don't get me wrong, Notre Dame is cool, fun. Like, you got the football games, basketball games, you know. They usually top in sports every year, you know, with their sports program. And, you know, you can get an education there as well. But, yeah, pretty much Notre Dame. Yeah, they're kind of like the face of South Bend.
I didn't know growing up that not everybody lived where they had this football team that was really important, and you stopped everything on a Saturday in the fall and your life revolved around that. I thought everybody had that. That's my favorite thing about South Bend for sure, is Notre Dame.
Especially growing up in the South Side, you had the South Side and then you had Notre Dame. And everything stayed within Notre Dame. So it was, you know, well, it's technically its own city because it has its own police force, its own fire department, and zip code. But so it was very separated. Without Notre Dame, a lot of stuff can't happen, but I think the way Notre Dame has their hand in deep pockets of South Bend, I think there's shortcomings there because they only are worried about them on that side and not either downtown or the south side.
I think they were accompanying changes. I'm not sure how much one reflect on the other until recently. Now I think the university and the city are changing together a lot.
When I moved here 11 years ago, the downtown you would go and it was still a lot of empty storefronts, and but there was something that just felt like potential. Like you just kind of walked around and were like, something's going to happen here, and that's what made me want to stay. To say I want to be a part of whatever this energy that's here. Like I want to be a part of that.
2010 was like for me where I saw that's where I saw the narrative changing, and I could see like things were shifting in the right direction. And I remember for quite a while, there were very few people, sort of like general public, that if you interacted with would have said that about the city. They would have said there's nothing going on, our best days are behind us, not ahead of us. And I would take them downtown, like one-on-one, and we would just walk like a little walking tour. And I would point out like, well, look, like this shop is now occupied, and at night this is what happens over here, and these events are happening here. And you see upstairs in that second story, there are artist studios up there now. And so, an hour later, they saw things in a different way.
There was not one exact moment at any given time. It was more a buildup, and realizing, one, losing my bad taste in my mouth that I was left here. That was one part of it. Two is actually seeing the progress that's being done. And three, how my children are being schooled and the community they're being around has definitely changed. Because I thought I could only get that in major cities, to be honest with you. You really only found that kind of progressiveness in cities. And I like that it has spread from there to now over to South Bend.
It got better and better. We brought in more stores, more people. It's just cool. It's just an amazing time to be in South Bend.
So every Thursday night I come here and I run the bar for the evening, and this is not my primary job, obviously. I'm a biochemist and I teach biochemistry at IU South Bend. But this is my night of the week to just kind of get out and meet people in the community and be here and have some nice conversation with friends and strangers. I think that if I were to talk about the change, again, from my point of view between what the city was like in the 90s to now, that now there's more of an audience for art and music and innovation that may have not been there back then, because there was this flight, if you will. The city was losing a lot of young people, but now there is more of an audience, and you really can't outsource art. If you want something good to happen, you really have to do it. So there's more of an audience now for art in general. So it's a nice transactional relationship. You want to create art, but you also want to have the audience for it, or you want to at least facilitate the environment for artists to be able to create art, and you want to also make it easy for the audience to be there and to be available to experience it.
So one of the things I've been thinking about recently, and I think this does actually apply to the city as a whole, is fighting the battles from the last war. I've been talking about this in my neighborhood a lot. There is I think a habit to get set. You were born and you kind of were active in a certain era of your life, or there was something going on in South Bend's history, when Studebaker closing and the factories closing, if that was your transformative moment, like that was the battle that you were fighting at that time. And it's really hard to transition to, it's 2019 now, that we're in a different place, and like fighting those old battles is not helpful anymore. because that war is over actually. So like getting your head around what the current challenges are, what today's challenges are, and breaking yourself out of the mindset. Because I have run into this quite a bit in South Bend, a mindset of what I consider sort of be to the last war's battles. And maybe because I'm coming in, maybe because I'm arrogant, maybe because I'm coming in with a fresh perspective, I'm looking at it and saying, those aren't the battles we need to fight anymore. Like we've moved past that. We're in a different era, and we need to start addressing things today.
Often you hear of this city named Rustbelt or anything else, and I understand why people are wanting to say that, because it was a Rust Belt city. But I think when you view a city that way and always still use a negative connotation, you kind of live within those confines. You actually shackle yourself to that theme.
Well, I think the biggest change watching it is because you hear about the industrial decline across the Rust Belt, which we are a part of, and you see that happening in a lot of cities, and it really takes its toll on it. And you see where in the last 7, 8 years, there's been a real push to rebuild and replace the industry that has gone away.
I think there will always be this kind of cloud of failure, and I think as long as that like crumbling infrastructure is seen along people's drive to work, there'll always be at least some kind of, whether it's a conscious recognition of, oh yeah, this thing used to be bustling and the population used to be this and the economic capability was this, or it's just a like kind of bummed out feeling that you get by driving by shut down and crumbling factories on your way to work or on your way home or whatever. I think that infrastructure really does affect the feel of people. And you couple that with like the seasonal depression that people get during the lake effect snow. I mean, like people's attitudes get really bleak in this area in the winter, and I think it's significant, you know, when you take seasonal depression, this idea of seasonal depression on one person is like, yeah, that kind of sucks that you feel sad and depressed through the winter. But when you take that and you say, now what if every single person of 100,000 people just feels like crap for a couple months? Like, it has a big impact, right? And so it's this really weird, like, geographic, economic, historic kind of like struggle of South Bend. But I think that engages something in people that I commented about being characteristically Midwest, this like dig your heels in, get the thing done. When I talk about businesses that have started in South Bend, it's usually because people worked nights and weekends to develop their hobby or their passion into a business while they were working a different job to fund that thing. And it's the artists in the area that work their full-time jobs so that they can spend their evenings and weekends slaving away over some sort of art, whether that's something they just do in their house for themselves or that's something that they're out sharing in the community.
For about 4 years, I've lived downtown.
Okay.
So I've kind of seen this city shift. It seems like we're going closer towards this, the arts, that we're coming together slowly. When I first moved here, it kind of felt like a ghost town, you know. But now these buildings are slowly popping up, the lobber, and slow but steady. People are wanting to move here instead of move away. Me and my friends were talking about this, and we kind of refer South Bend, we use the term incubator. It gives you a start to get your feet wet, jump in the water, and become someone. So I feel like this hometown, it feels more like family than, you know, my own family, and it's a really beautiful thing. I love most of the people here. I love this town. I love being here and living here, and I want it to continue to grow.
I hit time and time and time this kind of like low barrier entry to start something new, to make some sort of impact. I think we have this wealth of small businesses that were started by people from South Bend, in South Bend, good at a certain thing, that then the public really gets to enjoy. So I always give like this handful of examples of like Zen Cafe, some South Bend folks that were like, I want to roast and sell coffee here in South Bend.
That's what I did. I couldn't find a cafe that I really wanted, so I built it. Now, obviously, it was on a limited budget, so a lot of it was DIY. A lot of it was late nights. But I still created it because I wanted it, and there was enough people that were like, hey, you need to open up a cafe. I find the South Bend community one of the most loyal groups of people I've ever met. What I mean by that is they're super supportive. If you open up a business, they want to see it happen.
I was trying to open a bakery in New York City, and yeah, it was impossible on so many levels, and South Bend was kind of pulling me back in so many ways, and I was surprised that it took me as long as it did to come to that realization of like, just go home.
So I guess the character of South Bend is cool because it's a city. It's large enough to have some of the nice city things. We have nice performing spaces. We have nice city parks. We have some museums. I mean, we've got some things that are, we've got good restaurants. I love the restaurants. We've got some things to do if somebody comes to South Bend and just has a week, or maybe they're coming to South Bend to work and has a week of evenings to figure out what to do. It's not like you go to the same family restaurant 5 times because there's nothing else to do. There's some really interesting things to engage visitors, but also to live in South Bend. The thing that I've been talking with a lot of people about recently is it's small enough that if you want to do something, you can make some sort of measurable difference in it, in that it's a large enough city that the resources are around us to do things, and there are people willing to help, and there are spaces to do things in. And once you are successful in moving something forward, in starting a project, opening a business, or opening a nonprofit, or starting a meditative dance series once a month, or whatever that is, it's not hard to get noticed on a scale of most people in South Bend have an opportunity to like view that and to see what's happening because of the size. So it's this, in my mind, it's this really magical size where it's like big enough to have some of the good things that come with a larger, I don't want to say a larger city, we're not a larger city, we're more than a town, right? But small enough that individuals with some ambition have a really good opportunity to make an impact without the help of a whole bunch of financial funding.
The best thing is there are a lot of small businesses here, so the best things are people feel like they can come in and they could do something and make a go at it. It's kind of amazing to me, and it's all ages, older people, younger people, everybody's like, oh, I'm just gonna do this business thing, and they kind of do it. So I think that's pretty awesome. Kind of the worst things, it's still very segregated, I think. You can kind of go down the street and it's totally different in the way it's built up.
Definitely, I definitely think it's racially divided. Just like, really, yeah, black and white, really, yeah. To make it short and simple, it is. It's rough. It's rough, man. A lot of shootings, stealing, a lot of drama. Yeah, a lot of things going on around here. Actually, so I remember somebody got shot. One of my friends actually got shot at the gas station, probably maybe a couple months ago. Yeah, but he lived, you know what I'm saying? So you got the people that been here, the locals, but then you got a lot of people from out of town Benton Harbor, Chicago, Gary, the list goes on and on. Other surrounding cities that come here, move here, and then I feel like they get mixed up with us, the people that's locally here, and causing some friction, man. Causing some. All the time, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, I feel like that energy kind of transferred over to South Bend, and now you got a gang, just a gang of shootings and violence, and list goes on and on.
Probably the shootings, but that's all around the world, and it's scary. But it seems like South Bend, there's more and more. I mean, we're getting random bars and just, it's something we can't really become numb to anymore. We can't. It was last weekend, there's 2 mass shootings in the, 2-day period. And this is the first time where I couldn't leave the house. I was so, I was hurting for the world, and I don't know. So I wish that the violence would stop in South Bend.
It's depressing here. It's not what it used to be. It's pretty much stereotypical at this point.
In what ways?
Just, with the shooting with Eric Logan, I think that was kind of pretty much stuff that we've seen on TV with a black man being killed by the police unarmed. So now at this point, I'm feeling like with those things happening, it's just like we're just like any place other when we never were. We always stood apart from, Gary and, those surrounding areas. We stood above a lot of things that happened, like the violence and just the impoverished areas, and just it's getting worse. So if I had to characterize it, I'd say it's pretty depressing here.
Honestly, my thoughts on that, I think stuff that happens in South Bend, it happens everywhere. You know what I'm saying? We're just like any other little city in America, but I feel like now, stuff been going on, but it's now finally getting national attention because Mayor Pete, a local from South Bend, is running for president. So now we got a magnifying glass on us because of him being a candidate for president. African American people were supporting him, but I feel like after the shooting, the stuff with the police and stuff like that, now I feel like we kind of took a step back, 'cause we're mad, we're upset, we're frustrated, we're pissed. We have every right to be. That shakes up the city. That shakes up our people. Now we're scared. Now we're nervous. Now we're walking around with our head over our shoulders.
Well, I think Mayor P has always been very aware of the racism in the police department. We know that for a fact. He covered up a lot of different things that he shouldn't have. I think that it has everything to do with him not wanting the press to take it the wrong way. But it actually backfired, and now it's in the public that he covered a lot of different things up when he first came in. And I think that he covered it up because he was just getting here. And he was just kind of getting a feel for things. And then it really didn't help with him firing Boykins right after that. But overall, I say, with cleaning up the city, he did good. But I feel like he needs to do more before he leaves. And he owes it to this community. Well, I think that racism is actually just like a bad marriage. I like to look at it that way. And it needs to be fixed. It needs counseling, you know? It needs these dialogues, you know what I mean? People just need to get out and talk to somebody that they wouldn't normally talk to, you know? I think that helps a lot. Everybody should have a white friend. I'm black, I should have a white friend. You're white, you should have a black friend. So that way we can understand each other better, you know what I mean? Well, why did they do that? Or why did they do this? Or why do they think this? Or why do they think that? Ask them, you know, just creating a dialogue, you know, first and foremost. And then hiring, people should be able to start their own businesses. There should be capital for people that's, you know, minorities that's starting their own business. Honestly, I'm not even gonna lie to you, probably sick of hearing it, but reparations would be good at this time. You know what I mean? It's people out here that's starving, can't pay their bills, haven't paid their rent. You know, like, these are the same people that have families that they're trying to take care of. You know, like, and we don't have any help. We've been ran through the ringer for over 400 years. You know, like, they say it's in our DNA that we're traumatized at this point. You know, like, come on now. Like, we deserve a break at this point. You know? Like, there's people out here, like, they're just tired. You know, like, it's so bad now that we're developing, like, mental health issues. You know, whereas 10 years ago, you're just fine. But the turbulence is nonstop. It's like being out to sea and you're, you know, just trying to withstand the waves, the tides, you know what I mean? That's how life feels for a lot of Black people.
I think South Bend is diverse and becoming more diverse all the time, racially, culturally, and what have you, which I think is a good thing. I think that we have fallen short as a city and as a community in bringing about a greater harmony amongst races. In fact, I think that's the great shortcoming of our city. So, I mean, as I told you before we begun this interview, I love the city. I've been here all of my life. I have no regrets about that. I care deeply about the city. I see great potential in our city, but I think that in that particular area of race, I think that's probably the one area that we fall most short in. And it's telling. It's a telling point in terms of our character when I think about how great a city I think South Bend could be. You know, they used to have this program in the 1960s that Lyndon Baines Johnson developed, the War on Poverty, and they had a program called Model Cities. South Bend was one of the cities that was called a model city back in the 1960s, and they had all these programs in this War on Poverty to balance the scales of justice and racial justice in particular. We had a massive riot in 1967 in South Bend, and buildings burned down, people hurt, folks shot, police shot Melvin Phillips back in one of those riot nights, and just a lot of stuff that has not yet been rectified and properly addressed, I think. And so those are little tarnishing marks there. So because a lot of the injustices, or the perceived injustices, were not maybe properly addressed or not addressed in a deep enough way, there remain some scars and some memories of things that took place way back in the 60s. I just thought about that when I thought about preparing for this interview, and I thought, wow, that's 1967. But not many people even know about that, and a lot of people don't remember who may have been involved in that, but there's so many others who still do remember. And so then when there's something else that comes up and it sounds like an injustice, it involves the police, you know, it brings scars onto the character of the city. We've grown a great deal over the last 2-3 decades, maybe, and especially in terms of the Black community. I wasn't paying much attention for a while, but I remember I thought that the city was maybe still about maybe 13, 14, 15% African American. I didn't know we'd grown to about 25, 26% over these last couple of decades, and I'm like, wow, I marvel at that, you know. But sadly, we don't reflect that 26%. I don't see billboards of Black folk, you know. So like if you came to the city, as you mentioned, if you came here and you didn't know anything about the city or the composition of the city, you would not probably readily believe that there's 25, 26% African American population in the city because it's not reflected in a lot of the things in the public spaces, in businesses, like I said, in billboard advertising and just those kinds of things, you know. And yet there are pockets of people who, like at this community center, there's a whole lot of unity. There's a lot of diversity as well. And there's a lot of kindness and a lot of grace. So the city's got great potential. I mean, it's not some horrible place to be. I think it's a very good city, but I just think it could be so much better. But we'd have to be intentional about that, you know, to try to make things appear to be what they're not is not the way to go. And I think that, I think one of the things probably our current mayor fell short in is really targeting racial inequity, racial injustice. And I mean, you know, I don't think that he came in with a bigoted approach, but I just think that if we're not intentional about racial problems, we'll be like we are across the nation. 150, 200 years after the ending of slavery, we'll still have slavery-like conditions in so many places, and we'll be so surprised that those matters still exist as they have existed for a long, long, long time. But if we're not intentional about them, they're not going away in and of themselves. We'll have to be intentional about making sure that we put the work in that needs to be put in to bring about real change. Yeah. It's difficult to say, and again, the issues with our police and with the so-called wiretapping issue, which has refused to go away, because those things were not handled well at the beginning, it seems to be very difficult now to actually engage that and be considered trustworthy to handle it, you know? Because the first thought that I think a lot of people will think about is, well, you're just trying to make points because you're running for president. And how can we trust you, you know? And I think that's the challenge right now. That's the great challenge right now. And the man's not a magician. I don't expect him to be able to work magic. You know, I really don't. That issue caused a lot of pain. A lot of pain. Not to mention current issues, you know, the current police issues and what have you. But that issue, going back 8 years now almost, that caused a lot of pain in the Black community, you know. So there needs to be real intentional reconciliation, and I think, you know, the more the better. I think mayor's got to prove himself to South Bend, as well as on the national. I mean, you're running for president, yeah, prove it to those people too. And if you have to say it 1,000,000 times, say it 1,000,000 times.
Well, it's been in the news, right? Like Mayor Pete's lack of support among African Americans has been in the news. And I personally am friends with African Americans who are not fans of Mayor Pete for various reasons. You know, I think obviously there's this risk that he runs of being a little too perfect. If you look at his resume, you know, sometimes it almost seems too good to be true. And it reminds me a little bit of Obama, actually, where there was a New Yorker cover a month after he got elected where he's walking on water and his foot starts to sink. You know, it's like, you know, he's a human being just like the rest of us. He's not actually perfect. And he's not going to be perfect. And Mayor Pete's the same thing. Like, you know, all the news stories that were coming out when he started becoming popular on the national scene, like, he couldn't go wrong. He was saving babies and, you know, making phone calls to hospitals in Norwegian and all this kind of stuff. So of course there's going to be a backlash to that. And I think the conversation around race as it relates to him is part of a backlash to him being sort of perfect. And a lot of it, ironically, you know, it's just like everything else in life, right? Some of it grew out of his perceived successes with the 1,000 Homes in 1,000 Days, for example. That was a big thing. He joined 1,000 homes. He met his commitment. He fulfilled his promise. Okay, a lot of people, job well done. Well, okay, but what happens after those 1,000 homes are torn down? Now you have 1,000 empty lots, mostly in the poor parts of South Bend, the poorest parts of South Bend. You know, so, you know, what did that do to those communities? I mean, yeah, the empty houses were probably a drag on the communities, but the empty lots are not an asset for them either. And so you walked away a little bit with the impression that he did this thing. It was sort of easy. It's easy to tear a house down. The creative process is much more challenging than the destructive process. You can destroy in minutes what it takes years to create. So tearing down 1,000 houses, yeah, I would say that was the easy thing. That was the easy thing to do. Filling in those communities is the hard thing to do. And then I don't think that he followed through in that part of the idea. Maybe didn't think about it. You know, at the time it seemed like it was enough to rid these communities of old, tumble down, tear down houses. But it wasn't enough. It's not enough.
Having kind of an engineer mindset, you want to gather data, you want to crunch the numbers, you want to come up with a plan that's best to fix a problem. And I think that Mayor Pete came in with that attitude, that he's just going to analyze problems, he's going to bring in experts, he's going to come up with the best solution to get things done and to move South Bend forward. And I think to an extent he's been successful with that. I think the shortcoming, especially early on, was recognizing that he needs allies, and he needs to work with neighborhoods and work with people to hear them out, and to get different perspectives, and to make sure that people feel like they're being heard and feel like they're being part of the process. And I think that's perhaps what he lacked early on. And I think that it took him a few years to get that, to begin to forge, relationships with different neighborhood leaders and other community leaders, and hear what they had to say. And I think that took some time.
At the end of the day, I'm a really firm believer is that you have to work on that coalition building. It starts with just one-on-one conversations, right? And 2x2 conversations, and getting to know the people up and down the street, and identifying areas of common interest. And it's hard though. It's really hard. It's easier to stay home and watch TV. I think his positive attitude and his youth probably has been great for South Bend. And you hear people say it, actually, like for the first time we feel like South Bend maybe did turn a corner. we have this new young mayor and he's full of ideas and he's trying things, you know, maybe not everything's going to be successful, but he's trying things, he's speaking about the city in a way that's different and that kind of points towards a new direction for the city, for the community. I think that was really important to have somebody who could come to a leadership position and have that conversation and start to inspire people on the grassroots level to say, you know what, he's right, and we can do this too.
I think he's been a real blessing for South Bend. And quite frankly, I think we've had some very good mayors over most of the time I've been here.
Mayor Pete was not really on my radar. Like, I didn't really care a lot about who the mayor of South Bend was, what they were doing for, I think, probably the first several years of him being in office. And I'm not sure what it was that really kind of clicked onto the radar. And maybe it was some of the, I guess, well-publicized issues that people started taking with. So things like smart streets downtown and the roundabouts downtowns. Like, people started complaining about these things happening. And when people start complaining about things happening, that's the clear indicator that things are happening, right? So we started seeing, my wife and I started seeing Pete just around town. He started coming to the roller derby bouts when we were going to the roller derby a lot. And then we ran into him like at the farmer's market restaurant one weekend. And it's like, man, this is kind of weird that the mayor is just like out and about and doing the same things that we do, because that's not an experience that we're used to having, right? And I think it was kind of a combination of those things that made me start paying attention a little more, reading up on the criticism, reading up on the things that he is trying to do and accomplishing. I think some of the infrastructure change downtown has made an impact on the character of downtown. So I used to play a lot at a DIY music venue downtown. And one of the notable things about downtown is all the shows started after like 6 or 7 p.m. And there was like nowhere to grab a sandwich downtown after 5 o'clock. There was just this notable vacancy of downtown at 5 o'clock once the businesses shut down. A lot of the restaurants only were open to serve lunch to the people working downtown, and there was no sort of like evening culture in downtown at all. And I've seen that specifically change in the last 5 years since I've been really aware of what's going on downtown. And there's restaurants very worth visiting any evening of the week now, and there's concert series and there's events and there's stuff going on downtown. And I know that that's been a big focus of Pete, specifically with changing the downtown streets back to 2 ways, which slows traffic down with the intention of making it friendlier for pedestrians and local traffic, parking and stuff like that. So that's something that I think he's got a lot of flack for, is traffic patterning downtown, which is this like super nerdy thing, right? But I think that whether it was that or some other combination of things going on, I think downtown has changed a lot, which is really cool. And I never thought that, at the age of 30, that I'd be 35 and like rooting for like downtown development at South Bend, right? But I'm part of a music festival that happens downtown now, and my friends are opening a coffee shop downtown, and those are things that are close to me, that I care about, and I want those things to succeed. And I think that there is, as I try to convince my friends from around the country that South Bend's a cool place to be and come visit, let me show you the cool things that go on, that like having a hub to what's going on, and it being downtown and near the historic part of town and near some of the arts development in downtown, I think is really cool. And I think it's good for us.
I do understand the criticism when you are investing in downtown and you feel like, you're living in a divested neighborhood with a lot of blight. It feels unfair. You come into a city that's, is Newsweek's like top 10 dying cities. I get that you have to prioritize and figure out how you're gonna bring things back.
I feel like some certain stuff is out of his hand. He only can do so much. Because the city was, I feel like, the city was kind of in a hole. And I feel like when he came, like he tried to bring life to the city. Like I seen the effort, you know what I'm saying? Like I seen the effort of him trying to turn things around. So I give him credit. You know what I'm saying? Like,
I have to give the mayor his props, and I don't care who doesn't like it. He has the downtown looking great. Great. I mean, it's came a long way with the city lights, the bike lanes, and you got the line bikes and things like that.
The downtown area, I think it's the best it's been since I first came. When I first came, it was a fine place because it was a shopping center. But then it went for a long time, nobody knew what it was. And I think now it's become something that it's a good place to be. There's social events down there, and they seem to be very active in that. I think it's safe down there. You can walk around down there. You can bike down there. It's a marvelous place to bike.
And the major reconstruction and tear down of the old Studebaker properties, you know, and Studebaker buildings were all over the near downtown area, you know, because they employed so many workers. And finally, after all those years of those buildings lying vacant and just in a horrible state of disrepair and what have you, now we're seeing real progress and buildings being torn down and reconstruction taking place. And so yeah, there's major shifting. And even as you ask me questions about what I thought about the city some years back and what I think about it now and stuff, my ideas are being shaped and reshaped and rethought about even as I'm trying to respond to you. And I'll probably go home from here and I'll think about some of those things. Oh, you know what? That probably was a little too rough. Yeah, I like driving around the city. I do it quite a bit, you know, because again, I really care deeply about the city. I guess my bottom line word, I think the churches, particularly the Protestant churches, could do a whole lot more to help bring about the kind of healing and reconciliation. So there's a role for the mayor, there's a role for the city council, there's a role for those in those political offices, but there's only so much that they're going to be able to do at the end of the day.
When you look at the work that the city has done on Western Avenue, as an example, they came in and did new street, new sidewalks. That was all part of Pete's Smart Streets initiative, extending that out onto the west side there and doing a facade grant program for the businesses there to improve their facades. That you've seen incredible business growth of people who live in that community deciding to start businesses or invest in their existing businesses in response to that work. And so you see what happens there when city government runs really well and it's actually able to incentivize local people to start local small businesses. And that's kind of what everyone says we want in our cities. And I think that's something that is often overlooked when we talk about the change in the city. And understandably, people are looking for things that are a little easier to grasp and see every day. But I think that's something that is that's huge. That change. I think that we've also just seen an incredible amount of investment in downtown, in particular. In people deciding to build things here. If you talk to some of the developers who were here before Pete, or right around when that Pete's first term as a mayor, they would say that really they were making irrational decisions to build things in South Bend. And it was more out of a love for South Bend and a feeling like somebody's got to do this. It wasn't this makes a lot of business sense. And if you start talking to them now, that more and more you're hearing people say this makes business sense for me to invest in the city. And that makes a huge difference when people want to, question why don't we have business growth in town and why aren't things being built in other parts of the city and stuff. The the hard truth is that in a lot of cities in America, like, just doesn't make business sense, and getting it there is really hard. And so we've seen, a variety of factors come into play there that have pushed South Bend to that point where it makes sense for people to invest.
I found it interesting, just one, this is one of the only LGBTQ centers in the entire state of Indiana. There are not that many. I think there's actually only one other if you don't count university settings. But outside of university centers, there's one in Spencer, there's IYG, Indiana Youth Group in Indianapolis, and then here, and that's it. There's really nothing else. So I came up here, one, because there are so few jobs where you can work in the community that you're a part of, especially with the LGBTQ community. There are just so few opportunities to actually work in that arena. So when this came available, I kind of applied on a whim, thinking they would hire somebody here. But then they hired me, and then I had to move. So I will say that one interesting thing about this place is that there are a lot of LGBTQ people. There's just not a lot of what I would call community. It's a lot of small pockets of people who know each other, but there's not what I would consider like a real community feel. Whereas places like Indianapolis or Chicago or New York or what have you, there is an LGBTQ community that actually kind of exists. And there's a lot of interconnection and a lot of crossover, but here it's a lot of siloed groups of people. So that's kind of the challenge right now, is to kind of build that community and try to network people together from different groups so that they kind of know each other and kind of build that community a little bit more.
I think when we talk about population decline, which is really the single largest impediment to economic growth, and we talk about talent retention for the gay community, it's even worse. So if you think like, people thought there was nothing to do and no opportunity, if you were gay in South Bend, you absolutely were like seeking connection, resources, social experiences in Chicago or in Indy. So to be able to keep those experiences here and then have the opposite effect where we were drawing people from urban environments to experience what was happening here, that was a big shift. And also I think, helped the LGBTQ community feel hopeful that this place was also, somewhere that valued them and wanted them to stay and wanted them to be healthy and like fulfilled and, kind of attend to their, attend to their needs, but also, their hopes and dreams to be in relationship and have families and have meaningful careers and, and not be worried that they're going to get fired for who they are and evicted for who they are. I love Mayor Pete. I consider him a friend. It's interesting. I don't know how to describe, like, when he came out, not like I was proud of him, but sort of. It was a really, like, I've never been so happy in my life of somebody who I've known who's come out. And just not only what it meant for him, but what it meant for South Bend.
Yeah, it's very meaningful. As I've gotten older, I used to be very active in the LGBTQ community, especially in New York. And then I got a little burned out on it. And when I got back to South Bend, I got involved in the center a bit and began to understand the issues with young people, and especially in the Midwest. New York, people tend to be, I think, more progressive and more accepting and more open, and in the Midwest, a little less so, perhaps. And I think when Mayor Pete came out, what it meant to me, is that you know, as a New Yorker or whatever, it's like, okay, kind of no big deal. The guy, you know, he's a gay guy, so what? But you know, LGBTQ people, especially kids who don't have supportive parents or supportive family, supportive community, supportive friends, it's a tough road, and my feelings about that were, wow, you know, there's kids around here who are now going to know that, like, Mayor Pete's this gay guy, and they may think that it's okay. You know, I think, and it was amazing to me that this was happening, like, in the Midwest, you know, in South Bend, in Indiana. And then when he was reelected, you know, landslide, it's like, wow, you know, it felt like progress has really been made, and I was really proud.
I think that's the biggest thing right now that he's doing is just the visibility. I mean, it was amazing that there was an out gay mayor in Indiana, of all places. And then how much he's been influencing the national stage is also just incredible. And again, from Indiana, of all places, you know, where the hell that come from? So, especially for the queer community, I think that's the biggest thing. And I know he's getting a lot of pushback saying he's not gay enough, but I get that a lot too. So I understand where he's coming from.
There are a lot of improvements I've seen made while I'm here. Certainly on the west side, I mean, the Western Avenue development, I think, is an anchor that is going to, you know, really, really grow. And the businesses that have opened on the west side, the restaurants, and it's really encouraging. I'm involved a bit with La Casa d'Amistad, which I think is just a dynamite organization, and the improvements that they help with, the education programs, and help with the Latinx community is just amazing, and I think that's great.
My dad came to work in the United States of America, and he went directly to Elkhart, Indiana, as a welder in the RV industry. But even back in 1998, when he was doing that, he made a conscious decision to move to the city of South Bend because of the quality of life, because of the schools, the affordability, and some of the housing opportunities in comparison to Elkhart. And even since then, my family has chosen to stay here, and particularly over the last 7 to 8 years has been really great for myself, my family, and I think for even immigrants in our city, because we've got a mayor that is very supportive of the immigrant population. He speaks Spanish. He'll come personally to the radio station and do infomercials or PSAs or live interviews about whatever topics need to be talked about to make sure that everyone has access, to the point to he put it in an executive order to make sure that everyone in his city could identify themselves with city agencies, because he wants everyone to be equal. So from our perspective, we don't see ourselves moving anywhere else, because we don't see another city that's going to be as welcoming for immigrants. Whether it's near us or in another state, we appreciate our small town, the investments that are happening, the access to things. And I know my family personally has benefited. We have deep roots here in the city, and hope to continue to grow with the city of South Bend.
Well, I think it's very affordable to raise a family and live, even if you don't have a family. Housing is very affordable. So if you are interested in owning, you know, it's doable here. Job-wise, it's fair. It's a fair market. I mean, that's one of the things they're trying to invest more in and bring more jobs in, tech-wise, and move away from the old industrial-wise, from Studebaker. The wages and salary, like I said, are comparable to that of a large city for what I do. My wife is compensated okay for, you know, her respiratory therapy. There are jobs here.
If I were to explain South Bend to somebody, I would say it's a town where you can definitely raise a family. And if you want to settle down and raise children and just, be relaxed and not have to worry about a lot of things, and, South Bend is a perfect town for that. It's homey. It's a lot of things to do now as far as raising kids and what to do with the kids and stuff like that. So it's not somewhere where as soon as you graduate from college, stay here and you're going to see a lot of opportunity. It's not that yet. Do I think it will get there? For sure, but it's not there yet. But as far as the character of South Bend, it's a family town, and it's a good place to actually raise your kids.
There's always been a sense of community, and when we haven't, community is what people make. So you have to go out and find community. You can sit in your house, or you can go and introduce yourself to your neighbors, and you can get involved in the neighborhood, and you can bring your kids to the park and talk to other people. So, but it's a sense of community that I think is a big part of this city.
I think overall we've seen the city, to a certain extent, kind of believe in itself again and have a little bit of pride in itself. People wearing the I Heart South Bend buttons, and people really excited about the city flag that was created, and then being able to modify it in ways that they want. So those are things that allowed residents of the city to feel excited about where they live, and to feel like this is a place that they wanted to be, not a place that they had to be or a place that they were stuck in.
You see a city go from declining numbers in population to growing numbers in populations. That's also a good sign.
There are all kinds of pockets in the city that were really, really struggling, that we're seeing like life come back to, and pride of place come back to, and that people are kind of banding together around these smaller vision for what their street should look like, or their block should look like, and their neighborhood should look like. And that's really beautiful for me to see, because it's exciting on that big level to participate in city revitalization, but this is where we spend our time. This is where we live. This is where we raise our children. And if we're not at work, we're like our homes and our neighbors. This is where quality of life matters most. So that's just like a very personal example of like this huge shift.
If you ever grew up here or lived here in the past and see where we're at now, you'll see what this guy actually did. And it's been tremendous. It's gone from a stain of Indiana to, I think, probably one of the better places in Indiana to live.
I like South Bend because it's a big enough place, and maybe Notre Dame plays a role in this, that it still pulls in a lot of culture, entertainment. I like that we have seasons. I like the slowness of life here, but I also like that, in an hour and a half we can be in Chicago if we need to get that big city feel. I don't feel like we're missing out on anything here. I feel like we have everything we need. Sometimes, I have a daughter who goes to school in Marion, Indiana, and she never cared about South Bend. Then she went to college and she said, "Get me one of those I Heart SB shirts, because South Bend is the greatest town." Down the bay don't have conveniences that we have here. So I think that South Bend has really, a great feel of just contentment.
Do you see yourself sticking around here? Is this where you want to be?
I used to say no, but the more I've been here, the more that I see improvement, especially in the music community and the arts community and the things that's going on downtown. Like, South Bend is getting bigger. Mm-hmm. It's getting bigger, it's getting better, which means hopefully it's going to be more opportunity. Mm-hmm. Would I want to stay here in South Bend and, have a career in music? I would love that. would love it. Do I think it's going to happen? I don't know.
There is one aspect, I think that there is one aspect to South Bend that is a bit of a multiple personality disorder, if you will. Because to me, it's always been the biggest small town I've ever lived in and the smallest big city I've ever lived in. I feel like in many ways, you get the best of both worlds, where you have the small town feel and everything is economically affordable for most people. Obviously, standard of living here is much lower than any city. But at the same time, it's a proper city in a big sense. But at the same time, I feel like in some ways you get the worst of both worlds, where you still have some big city problems, but you also have some small town problems as well. So we're kind of stuck in between. I think that there is a nice flavor to it because it's its own unique identity, that we're a big little town, but also kind of a small big city. But there's also, you see people complaining about having to park a block away from where they want to be. And I say, well, if you want the big city, you're going to have to deal with big city problems. I heard somebody at the grocery store complain because she was ahead of me in line because she called the city and didn't get a call back from the mayor, and how that would never happen in our neighboring city in Mishawaka. She would probably get a phone call right back. So we have an identity problem, I think.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
I think South Bend is surprising. I think that it is a much deeper, richer place than it appears from the outside. And I think that its size is an advantage. I feel that the impact an individual can make here in South Bend is incredibly big.
I feel like people are more explicit about South Bend. Do you know what I mean? As a community. Okay. So before, South Bend, okay, we're a city, no big deal, it's our home. But now I think we're defining ourselves in a unique way, maybe because of the national attention recently, maybe because of all the changes, whether it's structural changes like streets, whether it's social structure and violence, with the increased shootings and whatnot, and whether it's what each of us can do as either activists. I don't like the word because it seems like you're activating against something, but as agents of change. So if we each do what's our passion to improve the city, I think that works. But I think more people are having that conversation. That would be the biggest change, is that we're searching collectively and individually for our identity.
Doing a lot of meetings with Invante, with Dustin and Marie when they came in, and just kind of seeing these kids come here. Maybe they feel like it's a smaller scale, and if they could make it here, then they could make it somewhere else, except when they finish their cohorts, they don't seem to be leaving. They decide that they like it here enough that they want to stay here and build their businesses here. If these kids have moved from New York, from Florida, from wherever they've moved from Georgia to come here, there must be something that's happening that they're going to bring here, and we want to do whatever we can to keep them here.
So Invante is a startup generator. Invante invites people who have entrepreneurial talent but don't have an idea to move to South Bend for 6 months and research problems. So Invante introduces them to problems, kind of with the thesis that there are a lot of challenges in a city like South Bend, pretty close to problems facing a lot of communities in America. And so if you could solve it here, it could be very useful in places. It could be scalable for a business. But we're small enough that you can get very quick access to the people who are feeling those problems and the people who are working on those problems. And so they invite those people to come here, research those problems, and hopefully over the course of 6 months, start a business focused on that problem.
I was able to get my education. I went to public school up until high school, and then I went to St. Joe High. And then from St. Joe High, was fortunate enough to get a full ride scholarship to Holy Cross College to get my bachelor's degree. And then since then, have just wanted to stay in this community at a time where many folks were leaving, where because we have these great educational opportunities, it's like get my degree and then it's like, boom, I'm out of South Bend. I'm gonna go to Chicago or Indy or New York, California, somewhere that's better or bigger or has more to offer. And for me, it was very different. I was like, well, no, I want to stay in South Bend and let's see what I can give back. Let's see what I can do to be a part of something better. And how can I become the person that I needed when I was growing up? So when the position opened up at La Casa de Amistad as a youth and community center that primarily served the Latino community, I jumped on it.
If my children, as they become adults, if they say they want to move back to South Bend, I have to say I'm kind of surprised, but they're starting to think that way a little bit more. I mean, there was a time when they're like, I would never live here. But now they're like, yeah, this place isn't so bad.
There's a weird excitement in the air that I at least feel of not a newness, but just like a momentum. And you're not gonna be disappointed by if you come for a weekend, you're gonna have plenty to do. It's not, you know, the place that so many people thought it was. You're going to eat really good food. You're going to meet mostly nice people and have some great conversation and leave a little bit happier, as silly and cheesy as that may sound.
This is like my hometown. I want to, you know, I'm not saying I want to be here forever, but because we never know. We never know what's going to happen. But for now, I see potential. I see positive growth, and I want to be a part of it, helping.
This is a city that is in transition. And we're not as far along as some of our sister cities, I would say. We're behind. But being behind just means there's more opportunity left.
It's scary for me. What's gonna happen in South Bend? It's the only thing I keep thinking about. And another thing I'm thinking about is, are we in a position to go through another change without Mayor Pete? Are we in that position? Can South Bend handle that right now? Because right now, Mayor Pete been helping us out a lot. Whether people want to agree with it or not, look at the stats. Look at what's going on around the city. If you look at pictures, 5 years ago, look at things 5 years ago compared to now, it's a dramatic change.
It was kind of like a teenager. It has some really good qualities, it's growing, and you can see that it's going to be great and is well on its way, but it still needs a little help. And I think the help comes from us citizens, what we put into South Bend. I see that it's going to be even more phenomenal than it is now. And I think that's what people would like, actually, to see that there are some bad things, but that we're working on and we're still moving forward, because nothing could ever be perfect. If it was, how boring would that be, right? What would you do after that? So I think having both of those things shows that we are more like everybody than if we were trying to be perfect.